Well, as we've seen in the negotiations, as we've seen in global responses, and certainly given the state of the global economy, what's at the forefront of people's minds now tends to be economics and tends to be infrastructure, tends to be geographic risks. And somehow there's a forgetfulness that what we're really talking about here is the vulnerability of people, of households, of communities, and of securing their resilience and securing their livelihoods. UNFPA is part of a group in the UN that's called the Social Dimensions of Climate Change Group. It's a group of 16 agencies that are trying to put people on the maps, put people at the center of this conversation, and to say that if the solutions to climate change, if we achieve solutions to climate change, but if they don't have people's resilience and people's development and people's livelihoods at the center, then they are in fact not solutions. Migration out of the deltas in Bangladesh and in Vietnam is happening right now. Sea levels are rising. We heard about small island developing states and their urgent needs for resettlement. So in terms of the timeline, we're in it. And it's certainly going to accelerate over the next 10, 15, 20 to 50 years. There certainly are components of this that are extreme. Thinking about people who need to relocate entire cultures, entire peoples. But I think it's also important that we think about this as part of adaptation. Migration is part of adaptation. It's essential that we help people have options and choices to move in a developmental way, rather than wait until the last moment and wait until it is an extreme circumstance and they are displaced and forced to leave. It's important that you have the right policies, the right safeguards, the right human rights-based approach, and the right legal framework to make migration part of adaptation and part of the choices that people have. One of the things to note is that the research is really strong in saying that most environmental migration and climate change-induced migration that's going to come is going to be internal to countries rather than international. So it's going to be a lot of movements of people from rural communities, often to urban communities, in their countries, in the same country. So what's critical there is to plan for that urban growth and to think about over the next 10 to 15 to 20 years, as cities in many cases double in size, how are we preparing for rural to urban migrants? How are we securing their livelihoods? How are we providing them economic opportunities? And are we providing land and securing the housing needs of the urban poor? It's a critical part of people achieving better access to services, of people improving their livelihoods, of people really achieving their potential and their capacities as human beings and as members of communities. So there's no doubt that the growth of urban slums is a significant risk for development, and it puts people in very, very difficult circumstances. But with the right planning and the right policies, it's our hope that if we make decisions now to plan for urban growth in the next decades to come, that when those decades do come, that urban growth will be developmental and will provide people the opportunities they need. Unfortunately, there are lots of examples of cities that haven't so effectively taken this approach, and so you see massive amounts of inequality. You see kind of divided cities, for instance, Lagos or Nairobi, or certainly South African cities. Even Rio, Sao Paulo. So unfortunately there are some negative stories. There are, however, some positive stories. There's Curitiba. This is a big policy gap, and what's clear right now is that many countries have anti-urbanization policies, policies to restrict urban growth, to prevent migrants from coming, and that creates two problems. One, it's bound to fail, because people come to urban areas both because they're pushed out of rural areas and because of the draw of livelihoods. And the second is that anti-urbanization policies, they don't slow or stop urbanization, they just produce bad or anti-developmental urbanization. They create greater inequalities, they limit people's access to services and to the very developmental potential that cities provide.